hour, we'll connect on a little bit about who Humane Canada is, just so that you know about the work we do and why we're engaged in this work. I wanted to talk with you about what the violence link is, how violence and vulnerability shows up in families with pets, and some tools that you might find useful when you're working with different clients around some additional screening concepts and questions you could ask, some next steps if animal abuse is disclosed, do you suspect animal abuse in any of your conversations, as well as resources that are available if there is someone in your life or in your practice who is disclosed to you that they want to leave an abusive situation and need some help, particularly around safeguarding their pets. And then finally, just an opportunity for some questions and a conclusion. But I do invite you to put questions in. I'm actually wondering if I can't see the chat box. Can I see that, Marianne, or will you see it?
You can see it, but I'll help you with that. You just focus on that, and I'll interject with the questions if it seems like the right time, and if not, I'll hold it to the end.
Okay.
If that sounds okay. All right.
Yeah. No problem. So the first thing I did want to say before I get started is that this presentation is going to discuss some hard issues around abuse, around animal abuse, around human abuse. And people find that very challenging, particularly, surprisingly, over the years, as I've given this presentation around the animal abuse side, people who can or regularly are confronted with human abuse find it even harder to hear about animal abuse. And so I just wanted to let you know that I will be using some different statistics for evidence, but I will not be going into detail at all about any kind of abuse. I'll not be telling stories about abuse. I'll not be showing graphic images. I will only show images of happy animals. But that said, if you do feel triggered by anything, feel free to mute me. Feel free to get up and go and get a coffee or go for a walk, do something else, or feel free to leave. And I don't know if you can come back, but hopefully Marianne can let you come back in when you want to. So just take care of yourself. Like I said, there will be no negative images. I only like images of happy people and happy humans. Okay, let's get started. So a little bit about Humane Canada. So we represent humane societies and SPCAs, and we have done so for the last 63 years. We are a federation in that classic Canadian way. We don't have governance over our members, but rather our members join us because they want to address the root causes of the different issues that they see showing up in their shelters. And so we work on, predominantly work on legislation and education. We represent the largest animal welfare community in the country. It's wonderful because we have this very diverse community that comes together. We have every province and 2 territories in our membership. We have some of the smallest organizations in the country. Our smallest member is 8,000 to 10,000 annual revenue and all volunteer run, so super tiny. And then we have the largest on the continent, which is BC SPCA, which is responsible for the entire province of BC. It has 43 shelters and a $40 million a year annual revenue. We have urban, deep urban members, and we have very, very, very rural members. And so you can imagine we get a very broad look at different issues from multiple different angles. And I think that's what gives us our strength when we're looking at and choosing what issues that we need to address. Our mission is to end animal cruelty, improve animal protection, and promote the humane treatment of all animals. And we do that alongside our members through communicating different issues about animal welfare to government, to stakeholders, to corporations, to the public, to advance animal welfare. And what we really like to think about it is elevate animal welfare. And this work that we're doing now, the violence link work that we're going to talk about today, is one of our flagship programs because it's critical. Our systems seem to see animals and people as separate and distinct issues. So our laws see that way, our social services see it that way. In fact, humane societies and SPCAs have pretty much been calved off in order to deal with the animal issues over here. And yet when you speak to Canadians, they're very much integrated with animals. We have more than 20 million companion animals. That's just dogs and cats. That doesn't account for pocket pets and birds and ferrets and iguanas. Canadians love their pets and they see their pets as family. Of course, we're also very integrated with our food systems. We eat animals. Animals are part of that system for us too. And so the violence link gives us an opportunity to remind everybody and bring everybody back together to say that we can help both humans and animals together. And that's the best way and the strongest way to address any of the issues that we face as a country or as a community. And so we started the National Center for the Prosecution of Animal Cruelty in 2015, and that we worked to train prosecutors on how to prosecute cases of animal cruelty. And it was through that work that they were saying in court, judges often, even when we get to sentencing, don't understand the links between animal violence and human violence. And so we aren't seeing integrated judgments with regards to both the humans and the animals in the situations. In fact, animals are often pleaded out altogether. And so we began our work on the violence link. We host the Canadian Violence Link Coalition, which brings together 10 different sectors like yourself, social work, academia, judges, enforcement, police officers, obviously humane societies, SPCAs, medical professionals, all to talk about how we can strengthen each other's jobs by recognizing this violence link. So maybe just in the chat, can you tell me how many people have heard of this concept of the violence link before? With just a yes or a no?
You can also use the thumbs up and the reactions if you want on the bottom right hand. Yeah. Yeah.
Thumbs up, great.
Couple. Yeah. Couple.
Yep. Great.
Yeah, quite a few. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So this will also be a good opportunity to ask any questions or just chat further about it. If you already know about it, that's fantastic. I like this description because it's super simple and we don't have to overcomplicate the situation. Basically, this was written by Phil Arkow, who heads up the Violence Link Coalition in the United States, which has been around for a very long time. They have a phenomenal amount of resources. So if you're looking for any resources at all and you can't find them at Humane Canada, I invite you to get on to the Violence Link Coalition of States. And at the end, I'll have a slide for you with these different websites that you can go to. You can also get signed up for his newsletter, which comes out quarterly and is full of phenomenal information. But basically at its core, when we talk about the violence link, what we're talking about is that when you have abusive animals, you're going to have a threat to people. And when you have abusive people, there's likely to be a threat to animals. And so whether we're working with animals or we're working with humans, we need to see it as one integrated system. There's about 50 years of evidence and studying on this issue. And it's interesting because even throughout all of the research, what comes up most as the most often seen but least recognized is domestic violence. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. But it's most definitely when you have animal abuse, that it's part of a larger system of abuse, something more that's going on, that's coexisting or happening together, integrated with each other. So what is the violence link? Where do we see it showing up? We see it showing up in family violence. We see it showing up in sexual abuse. We see it showing up as a gateway crime and also as a concurrent crime. And if you do know about the violence link, or it's just somewhere in your head now, you're thinking, oh yeah, I think I've heard about that. It's likely that you've heard about it as a gateway crime. And so in this case, you may think of a serial predator, a serial killer or rapist, someone with a long history of violence or an outburst of extreme violence. It's very common that they had committed an act of animal cruelty or several acts of animal cruelty before they commit the act of cruelty to the human. And so you might think of a Luca Magnotta, if you know that case here in Canada, where he committed a heinous crime and he had been being tracked for committing heinous crimes against kittens prior to the crime that he committed against a human. A Jeffrey Dahmer is another case you may think of. It's there's a saying out there that, well, not all animal abusers become serial killers. All serial killers have a history of animal abuse. And so that's that common way. People hear it through CSI, or they hear it in the media. The media loves to pick it up. The other way is through concurrent crimes. And those are, you might think that, you may have heard that dog fighting is very much embedded into organized crime now. So if you have guns, gangs, and drugs, you likely also have animal fighting. So it's not an integrated crime, but it's happening at the same time. However, the areas that we want to dig in today is around family violence and sexual abuse, because they're what touch your lives. And as I was saying earlier, that's where the most link crimes are, or link abuse is happening, but we don't really talk about it, and people don't really know about it as much as they might know about it as a gateway crime. So this is another schematic from the National Link Coalition in order to really illustrate that where the violence and vulnerability with families and families with pets sits. And so we see it in 4 different areas. There's the animal abuse itself, there's the domestic violence, there's also elder abuse, and then child maltreatment or child abuse. And all of these abuse forms really fit together and co-occur and cross each other. As I'm sure you're likely to know and have been well versed in domestic violence and elder abuse and child abuse, you may not have heard about how it's linked to animal abuse as much. But when an act of violence happens in one of these areas, it's very much not an isolated incident and likely to be happening in another one of these areas as well. In March 2016, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police actually recognized this issue, and it's a challenge to get it recognized, but they had endorsed the National Framework for Collaborative Police Action on Intimate Partner Violence, and in there it recognized that threats and harm to pets is very much a part of intimate partner violence. And so let's dig in a little bit into the area around families. So perpetrators of violence, not only are they, if there's a pet or an animal in the house, not only are they subjecting the abuse to their human victim, they will sometimes, if not often, also neglect, harm, or kill the companion animals, but also the livestock. And that's why you'll see this picture up here. We see cats and dogs very prominently in the picture, but you'll also see behind there horses, cows, bunny rabbits, ferrets, sheep. Because while we tend to think in an urban lens about the companion animals we have, we sometimes neglect to think about the livestock as also a method of control or revenge that an abuser can use. Basically, it's any animal that the victim cares about can be used as this method of control or revenge. And they'll use the animals to coerce or control, to intimidate children or women in order to get them to remain silent about the violence that they're experiencing. So it's a tool to threaten their victims by, particularly around the fear of for the life or the well-being of the pet. So you can imagine this as, if they don't comply with what the abuser is asking for, then the abuser will harm the pet. If they speak out about their abuse, then they know that the animal will then suffer the consequence for it. And very much is the same way we feel about our children. You've likely come across this in your family mediation, or you will be as time moves forward. More and more people definitely see their family pet as their child. And so it's very much the same emotional connection, and therefore the tool that can be used to coerce the person. Perpetrators who abuse pets also use other forms of violence, which is pretty standard considering that they're already violent compared to those who do not abuse pets. And this is an important part of the puzzle, which is that abusers will use pets and will use abuse of pets because they know that, sadly, police won't likely investigate animal abuse. the same way that they would investigate domestic violence cases. And now this is changing. This is part of our work with police. And I'll just give you one story about a family. We had done some training with some police here in Ottawa. And about a week later, they had been called because of a puppy who had a broken leg. And the police officers that responded, fortunately, had been trained in the violence link. And while they went to the call and they took the puppy out of the situation, took the puppy to the vet, it twigged them that they should go back and ask some more questions, because this was in a family of 4, and they wanted to, they didn't ask any questions around what else might be happening in that family. And so they did go back, and it ended up with the father, the husband, being charged with 11 criminal offenses, including uttering threats to kill his daughters. And so it's a clear example why I bring it up is because we don't give it enough attention, we don't think about it enough, that when things are happening, it can slip through the cracks. And the abusers or someone who is being violent knows that. And so they will choose to focus on the animals. I might just take a breath there and check and see if there's any questions, Marianne.
I'll have a look at the chat. I don't see anything. And it really, it's really sounds like Barbara is open to answering your questions as we go along. A lot of our speakers corners, it's less interactive, so we really appreciate that, Barbara. But the culture is generally to wait till the end. So
okay.
It sounds like it's very interactive. And welcome your questions. This is very powerful. And what you just said was, sort of, I'm shivering here. And as mediators, we work alone, and a lot of us are alone. And think, I really think your check-in at the beginning was really important to make sure that you're feeling okay, to understand that, we can have a good conversation about this, to support each other and think about, this link, which is really brand new for some of us, or just really just a good first deep look at what the violence link is. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be useful to give you some Canadian research. Interestingly, much of that 50 years of research that we do have is all coming out of the United States, a little bit out of Australia and New Zealand, minimal out of Europe comparatively. And so we've been hungry for some Canadian research. And the University of Windsor, Dr. Amy Fitzgerald, has been doing about 4 to 5 years of research now on the Canadian context, which is really important. And something that's interesting about it is that we tend to think, as Canadians, I believe we tend to think that we're a kinder, gentler nation than, say, our brothers and sisters to the south of us. The Canadian research that's coming out is actually demonstrating a higher incidence of violence-linked crimes or violence-linked issues in Canada than compared to the stats coming out of the States. So it's another reason to make sure we have this, especially as we're communicating with politicians and communicating with lawmakers, to advance the laws and have them recognize the violence link, that this is a concern in Canada. And so I wanted to go through some of the highlights with you. This comes from some research that she did with women who had already left their abusive situation and were being sheltered in a women's shelter. So it doesn't account for women who haven't left, for women who left but went into a friend's house or a family home but didn't get into the shelter system. From those women that identified as wanting to do this survey, 89% reported that their abusers had engaged in animal abuse. 65% reported that their abuser physically harmed their animals to control, coerce, or punish them. This is a new piece of information that, to Dr. Fitzgerald's understanding, there had not been an empirical way to study this. Her research put together a scale of degree of violence against an animal and degree of violence against the woman, and had the women rate the degree of violence to the animal and the degree of violence to themselves. And there is a direct correlation between the level of violence, so the intensity of violence that the animal experiences from the abuser directly to the type of violence or the degree of violence that the woman will be experiencing from the abuser. And so it's very important that we as professionals that are interacting with families and with people that may be in a victim situation, they may not be, obviously, that we're alert to some of the clues and some of the ways that we might identify whether or not there is link abuse going on, because it can be very serious. 14.5% reported that their abusers killed their animals. So you can imagine if the animal and the woman are experiencing the same level of violence, what that could mean for a woman. 56% of women who flee violence report delaying and not leaving because they don't know what to do with their pets. Our system doesn't, it's getting better in the last 5 years, but it doesn't recognize that when a woman needs to leave, she needs a place to take her animals. And so women's shelters don't allow animals. We now have about 5 in Ontario that are accepting co-housing. So that's very exciting, but without a path to go down and with their animal, they won't leave. And then this next stat to me is an astounding one and an important one, is that of the women who did leave and left their pet behind, a third of them went back to either check on the family pet or moved back in with their abuser in order to protect the pet because they couldn't get the pet out. And I think that's so important when we look at how we're structuring our social safety net. When a woman is fleeing violence, that's when she is most at risk of being murdered. And so they're leaving their pet behind because they don't have another solution for the animal. And then they're going back to check on it or move back in, putting themselves directly in harm's way in order to protect their pet. I'm not going to read through all these, but I do want to touch on children and how children, remember, if you remember the circles, there's domestic violence, elder abuse, child maltreatment, animal abuse. And there's a significant amount of research about the harm that are done to children who witness violence against animals or engage in violence against animals. And I just wanted to highlight 3 statistics here, although I welcome you to read them all. 76% of animal cruelty in the home occurs in front of a child. So when you're thinking about a family and wondering if there is stress or issues or animal abuse happening, it is highly likely it's happening in front of the child, and it's having a significant impact on that child, not to mention on the animal. And that 78% of children who experience those threats or harms to their animals actually took action to protect those animals. So whether that action was to be coerced into having to do something themselves, or it's to step into harm's way themselves and stop the abuse to the animal. So either way, I find that to be a very devastating statistic, to think of children and animals in these very, very vulnerable positions. And of course, finally, a child who is being cruel to an animal, it's usually an important symptom of a negative experience that they've already had, and can be a predictor of future aggressions or future issues. So that's a real waterfront view, if you will, of the violence link and the different ways we see it showing up in both family violence, sexual violence. Oh, and I'm sorry, this is out of order. I'm just going to go over to here. I apologize that this is out of order. Oh, did I miss a slide? Maybe it isn't out of order. Maybe it's just me. I'm out of order. Okay, sorry, I missed this.
Your slides are very cool, though.
So back,
I thought you were just passing over that one.
How I skipped
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Nope, I guess I must have clicked too quickly.
Yeah.
So this is a slide about the sexual abuse of children and animals. And I wanted to tell you a story about how we got to this moment of having the stat that you see up there on the screen from the Center for Child Protection. In 2016, our federal Supreme Court actually weakened our bestiality laws. And so much so that basically what was fairly well crafted or fairly protective legislation became that bestiality was only defined as had to involve penetration, basically. And the vast majority, about 80% of sexual assault of animals does not involve penetration. And so it left animals very, very vulnerable in Canada because it basically legalized those acts for about 4 years. I'm pleased to say in 3 years, in 2019, we were able to close the loophole, and it is now all forms of sexual abuse of animals is illegal in Canada, which is very important. But why I tell you that is because when the law got weakened in 2016, it alerted the Canadian Centre for Child Protection to something that they hadn't really thought about before. They receive all of the tips, the cyber tips for children who are being exploited on the internet. And so they have a lot of data and a lot of information, but they hadn't really thought about where sexual assault of animals might sit alongside sexual assault of children. And so they began to do some research. And as you can see, it was immediately apparent for them that animal victimization and child victimization went hand in hand. In fact, 82% of the cases of bestiality also involved the sexual abuse of a child. And it can happen directly where the act is happening on both, or it can happen alongside and can be a predictor that it may be happening to the child. And one of the things that I think is instructive to think about when you, as family mediators, are thinking about or looking for signs or noticing signs is when it comes to children and women who have been coerced into sexual assault of their own pets, it's still an incredibly deeply shameful thing. And so one of the things that the Canadian Centre for Child Protection found in their research was that, well, they may be willing to disclose their own abuse, they may be willing to disclose many things, there is still a deep shame and a fear of disclosing that this act had happened to them, that they had been coerced into it. And so I think that's important, that we need to speak more about it and be able to speak about it as practitioners, because it is there and it can hurt a lot. And if we don't allow a space for somebody, if they have to disclose, then it can become even worse. I am happy, as I said, to say that at least, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this topic is getting people chatting for sure. I think the, you know, as a family mediator for, I think 15 years now, I've heard of one person telling me about bestiality, and I, you know, I received the information, but didn't probe as much as I would now, knowing that there's these connections, the violence link is there. I was horrified and did my best to sort of act like this wasn't something that was horrific to me. I normalized the disclosure and dealt with the issues related to, I guess, the sensitivity around that, and sort of this person had felt her husband had abused the animal, their pet, and she felt sort of that this was a betrayal of the marriage. There were no young children. And I have talked to other mediators about this and had other people tell me that this is something that they've heard in a mediation. And so I think for us, this is very important to recognize if there's minor children, if, you know, we're hearing things like this, it's a key to dig deeper. And one of the questions is sort of, I guess, you know, I don't really understand animal sexual abuse other than what I've been told by my client. But one person wants to know, what, if it's not penetration, what is it? Like what would a sexual abuse of a animal be? And it's a very specific question. If you don't want to answer it, it's fine. But I can't really imagine in my mind what that is either.
Yes, and so it's fine for me. When I started working on advocating to close this loophole in 2016, I didn't realize how much people do not want to talk about this. They just don't. And so I became very comfortable talking about it at cocktail parties and from Parliament to the media, you name it, I was talking about it.
Well, that's good, because it's a hard one. Yeah.
Horrified that our government would let this loophole stay open for 3 years. Horrified that people aren't talking about it, because it is a tool used to really control women and children. And so the 80% that is not. So if you can imagine, and please, you can mute me now or walk out of the room if you need to, penetration either of the animal or having the animal penetrate a human, it's very hard. It's not something that's easily done. So any other form of sexual act you can think of, like oral stimulation, digital stimulation, the using of the penis in different ways, all of that is sexual assault. Just as it is for a human, it's the same for a child or a woman with an animal. And the way our law is now written is that any kind of sexual contact of any nature, regardless, it is all about intent. So if the person is intending it to be sexual, it is sexual. And it's the same way our sexual assault laws are written as well. So it may be something you don't think of right away, but if the person was intending for that action to be sexual, it is sexual assault of animals. It is bestiality, but most common oral and digital.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. I think it's probably, I'm imagining it's very hard for all of us to hear these sorts of things, right? I don't think this is not part of my normal dinner conversation, but I am glad that you are there to close that loophole, and also to show us that there's this strong connection for, a really high risk for child sexual abuse related to animal sexual abuse. So I think that's important. There's a couple of people asking, like, how would you ask about that sort of thing? Not specifically about animal sexual abuse, and you might be getting into it later, but what sorts of questions would we ask and that sort of thing when we're developing rapport and doing our screening interviews, because we screen for domestic violence, intimate partner violence at a session with each person individually. Have you any tips on what questions we could ask about family pets?
I do, and it's coming up in about 3 slides.
Okay, good.
So
okay.
I'm going to go through the vulnerability side, which is a little more, well, none of it's positive, but there's some more upbeat pieces in there. If you are interested in more detail, the report that this comes from, I'm going to give you the link at the end, at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. There's both an executive summary, if you want to just look at the highlights. If you read the whole report, it will go into exactly how many times of which crime of sexual assault happens to the animal. So I have read it. I found it very hard, but if this is something that you think intersects with your work and you need to know about it, and you need to know about some of the bigger details, it's all in that report too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the vulnerability link, this is something that we talk about. We've just gone through the violence link and all the ways that violence intersects on animals and people, and that it is very likely that if an animal is experiencing abuse, or a child or woman is experiencing abuse, the pet in the home is also experiencing that abuse. So keep that in mind when you are doing your screening, and I'll give you some very simple questions about that. But beyond the violence link really is the vulnerability link. Our love of our pets makes us vulnerable, just like our love of our children makes us vulnerable. And so I wanted to just highlight some of these areas for you around how do we see that showing up. And so the first is around elderly, and it could be elder abuse. So animals being a main relationship for the elderly, particularly if they're living at home alone, a very important relationship. So if someone is engaging in elder abuse, it's just the same as children or women in domestic violence. It's an easy way to coerce the elder into whatever action they want them to take. It can be both intentional or it can be unintentional. So children, for example, are caregivers who don't care as much about an animal as the elder would like that animal to be cared for. And so we see that direct elder abuse, but we also see vulnerability links. For example, an elderly person has to be moved into a different level of care, a different home. Their animals can't come with them. Not yet, because our social safety net doesn't recognize that. And so those animals, this is a heartbreaking story that happens far too often, end up being surrendered because a family member doesn't want to care for them. And so elderly animals showing up at a shelter who have just been taken away from their owner who's now gone into a home. And so how do we better care for our elders and care
Barbara, I think you've frozen. I don't know
For
if
their
others
pets
can.
and recognizes.
Okay, you're back. You
Am I
froze
back?
for a minute there. Yeah, you're back. You're back. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry about that.
You were lost in space.
And I'm in downtown Ottawa. How do I end up
Oh,
in a
I
bad
don't know.
connection?
I have no idea. I have no idea. It just happens all the time.
So the other area is homelessness and the deep and important relationship between homeless people and their pets. There's a long-standing systemic belief that homeless people shouldn't have pets. They couldn't take care of their pets. And yet it's actually the data coming out of Guelph University, the research they've done is it's quite the opposite. That actually homeless people's pets tend to have a higher body condition score than pets that they've looked at in suburban homes. Same with behavior, because those pets get to be with their people all the time. You can think about suburban homes or other homes, other housed people who have housed pets that might leave their pet alone for 8 hours. And so it's a bias against homeless people having pets. And so one of the things that we advocate for, they become very vulnerable because they can't get access to the services they need to take care of their pets. For example, vet services. And they can have their animals taken away summarily with no explanation whatsoever by somebody who thinks they should be taken away. And so it makes them very vulnerable because of the deep love and connection they have to their pets, just like the rest of us. And of course, this is the next issue I'm going to talk to you about, which is that connection between families and their pets and what happens when somebody needs to flee and they don't have a way to flee. Actually, I'll talk about that just at the end. I'm going to move into talking to you about tools, exactly what you were preempting me for, which is what can I do? How do I ask about this? So first of all, with screening, I don't know how often you would actually have an opportunity to see the to be in a home, for example. But I wanted to tell you about the physical signs that you can be looking for when it comes to animal abuse, which is very similar to those that you might see with children experiencing abuse. So physical neglect. So is the animal's physical condition betraying the fact that it's being neglected? Does it look in poor condition? Is it too thin? Does it have matted fur? Do you look at the animal and think, oh, it doesn't look so good? As opposed to, when you see a beautiful animal who's in great condition, you're, oh, that animal looks really good. So that's one thing to look for. Any kind of physical injuries, burns, bruises, cuts. Of course, they have their fur, so that can be harder to see. However, if any kind of cut or burn is there, you will likely notice if it's not healing well, which could be from a poor diet. And then fractures, well, you can't see that. You might look for an animal that's limping with no particular reason for it. Could be a fractured limb that's either still fractured or is still healing. And then emotional abuse, very similar. Does the animal demonstrate any kind of fearful behavior around the person that is the abuser? One of the things they'll do when they're really nervous is dogs, I'm talking about dogs here, they'll sit and they'll lick their lips and they'll lift their paw. So there's some different clear ways that might twig you that this animal is not doing well. Of course, you're going to ask your questions and dig into it because there could be any number of reasons. But these are some of the signs that you might notice to get you to trigger you to ask some more questions. And so then when thinking about those questions, you can ask questions really directed on the safety of the animal in the home. So very simple questions, and you may already ask these. Do you have animals in the home? And that will give you one way in. An interesting question is, how many animals do you have now, which will give you an understanding of the whole scope of the family, and how many animals have you had? Particularly, my understanding is, although I'm not a social worker, this is an important question because what an abuser will do is either kill animals. So if you have a child, for example, or perhaps even an adult, and you ask, how many have you had? And you can they develop a pattern of a new animal every year. That may be an indication that an abuser is using that animal to control the child or the partner. And they may do it a couple of ways. They may kill the animal, or they may surrender the animal. They may give the animal away, which is another form of emotional abuse to the children or the partners in the relationship. Are you concerned about their safety? This going back to the animals. Do you have a place to take them for safekeeping? Do you need our assistance? So those are some very basic entry questions that you can ask that can lead you to hear more details about what's happening and over time, particularly around how many animals and how many animals over what period of time. I wanted to just, this is in Ontario, super simple right now. If animal abuse is disclosed or suspected at any time, you can call this number. So just recently, as of the beginning of 2020, the government of Ontario is now responsible for investigating animal abuse, whereas prior to that, it was the Ontario SPCA. And so if you suspect any kind of animal abuse, please call this number and report it. The last tool I wanted to leave you with was around pet safekeeping. And so this idea that abusers abuse the animal, the partner wants to leave the relationship, but has no solution for their animal, and so they stay and continue to live in a state of abuse in order to protect the animal. And given that we know the devastating effect of violence and abuse on families and on animals, it should be easy to access the services that one would need in order to take their animal with them and to protect themselves and their animal together. Unfortunately, it's not common. As I said earlier, it is starting to cusp and change. And so Ottawa had got its first one 2 years ago, its first women's shelter that allows you to co-locate. At this point in time, though, the most common things that people can do is there are some humane societies and SPCAs that will take animals for a certain period of time. Unfortunately, it's a limited period of time because of the nature of the shelter. And so another service has come up, which is known as safe pet keeping, where different organizations will foster a person's animal while they're fleeing violence and getting themselves set up. And so this is really important because, well, a couple of weeks or months at a humane society is good. It may not be long enough for the person to get back on their feet and reestablish themselves. And so safe pet keeping establishments where they actually foster the animal, they'll take them for an unlimited amount of time, sometimes months, sometimes years, until the person is ready and can call for their animal to come back. And so this is an important service that's growing. And I wanted to let you know about Safe Pet Ontario, which is run by the Ontario Veterinary Medical Association. And I'm going to give you the link at the end here. It's a great system where you can reach out to them and they will direct. You can give the link to anyone you want to give it to, and they can contact them. And the animal is taken in. It's given a vet check, which is very important, as we were just talking about, in case there's physical abuse that has already, that the pet has already experienced. They'll get their vet check. They're put into a foster network. And then when the person, the owner is ready, they can call for the animal to be brought back to them. Thing is they don't know where the animal is, of course, in order to protect the animal and the person from the abuser finding them. But it's an excellent system, and it can be long-term fostering or short-term fostering. So if you do know somebody who's struggling.
Sorry, I was going to ask how you volunteer to be like, how do those people become, like, how do people become foster parents to dogs under Safe Pets or cats or
cats?
Yeah.
Or iguanas, just about anything you
pocket
can imagine.
Pets,
most commonly dogs and cats. So I'll give you the link. It was on this page here. And there's also another one that I put in here, which is the Link Coalition of Toronto, and they do sell safe pet keeping. And typically they'll run volunteer programs. There's a Safe Pet Ottawa as well. And it's all on number 4, the Ontario Veterinary Medical Association's website. So that you can get involved if you want to volunteer. But when I was going through this, we're very lucky in Ontario both to have one number to call for animal abuse and one place to go for pet safekeeping now. And OVMA only started this program a couple of years ago, so it's new. And they're actually working on coming out with an app as well that people can use to find safe keeping right away. So I just wanted to also, oh, go ahead.
Another question. So there's a question about, is there, and I guess this has maybe come up in a mediation where the mediator has learned of trapping and drowning of wild animals, like the skunks in our neighborhoods, or, you know, there's rabbits. I just moved, there's rabbits everywhere. Where I used to live, there was raccoons everywhere. And is there a correlation between trapping and hurting wild animals to family violence?
So it definitely depends on intent. So if you're talking about, there are trappers, there's professional trappers.
Right, yeah.
Trap animals for a living. That's a living, and that's a recognized living
right.
in Canada.
Yeah.
But if what you're talking about is in downtown Ottawa, trapping raccoons and drowning them or abusing them or harming them.
Right.
I don't have anything in data to say that would be the same, but it's illegal. And so it's causing harm and abuse to the animal. You can't do that. So I would say that it's definitely a sign of somebody that has violence issues, that they're not calling, like if you have a raccoon problem or a skunk problem, you can call a professional to come and exclude the house, exclude them, live trap them, and take them away. Yeah.
There's
so
also a question
of live with terrible wildlife, but so for the person who asked that question, not terrible wildlife, I shouldn't say that, anyone who
intrusive or
if someone's living in your house that you didn't want living in your house, there's humane ways to handle it. But it would be intent and listening with your ears about, is this action being used to threaten somebody in the house?
Right. Okay. That's a good distinction. Someone's asking about these links. Will they be shared later? We could maybe copy paste them somehow into the chat or something. I don't know if
I can copy paste them, but my experience with chat is you can't actually take them off of there.
Oh, maybe you could send me them afterwards, and if anyone wants them, they can email me, and I'll send them out to you.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. I'll send them, and that way you get the hot links.
Just
to tell you a little bit about, so on Humane Canada, under our violence link section, you'll see that there's a couple of resources there. One for recognizing the violence link in your social work. There's also a review of the literature, so about a quarter of a page per different ways we see the violence link showing up in different areas, so far more detailed than what I went through. So if you're looking for some more data or research, that's there. As I was saying, with the National Link Coalition, a lot of information on there. The Saskatchewan SPCA also has a site that has some interesting resources for people involved in social work. That's violencelink.ca. We talked about OVMA and the Link Coalition, and then that's the link to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection if you would like to look more into that issue. So I will stop talking and see if there's anybody with questions that I can help with.
Okay, so I'll ask a question. Just, you know, when you're in a mediation, you start to hear about you know, some sort of maybe borderline stuff about an animal, where, you know, I often hear people talking about, you know, oh, she got a dog and I didn't want a dog. I was never part of the dog. I'm not paying for the dog's vet bills. I hate the dog. It's just another symptom of her not listening to me in the relationship. You know, she went ahead and got this. I'm allergic to the dog. You know, and then you interview mom, and mom says, yeah, he won't feed the animal, or you know, he talks roughly to the animal or something. If something is sort of in the gray area, would you call that one, whatever that number was, 1-800 animal? And would they be able to talk to you about, give you advice about what to do or say, or how to support the family to take care of the animal in a way that's more humane?
So I would have said prior to January 2020 that yes, that's what the OSPCA would have done. They would have helped provide education on what needs to happen, what legally you're responsible for, and what humanely you're responsible for.
Yeah.
and help them. And in fact, they even had something called education orders.
Oh.
So instead of charging the person, they would give them an education order on what they had to do with the animal in order to bring up to standard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe the government is doing that anymore. And
Oh,
so
okay.
for them, it will be, is it an abuse case? You can,
Okay.
it's brand new, so you can go ahead and test that system.
Okay.
But I think some deeper conversation is warranted
Mm-hmm.
there, because you can, I imagine, have a family where somebody's got an animal that someone else doesn't want. And that doesn't necessarily lead to abuse. It could lead to a breakdown in the relationship.
Yeah.
But I think where I would have asked more was around if this person was disclosing that he doesn't feed the animal, he talks to the animal harshly. My next question there would be, are you concerned for the animal's health or welfare?
Right. Okay.
And then allow them to disclose if there is further, if it's like, no, I mean, we and the kids still take care of the dog is fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or cat,
Yeah.
or any, but
Yeah.
that might be a window in to find out if that person is concerned for the health and welfare of the animal. And
I like
then
that question.
report.
Yeah, and report. I mean, I think that that's an addition that I'll be making, and probably all of us here watching. Just, are you worried about the animal safety? I think that's something I hadn't thought of. I focus so much, and I think we all do, on process design and keeping the family safe, and maybe the person who's had the abuse placed on them, that to keep that person as safe as possible, to put in all these things that I really, even I had my dog died, but I love animals, and I would always think of them as a family member myself, and have certainly written several parenting plans, including like what's going to happen to the dog, not only the financial component, but how's the dog going to be cared for, and that sort of thing. But I don't think I made the direct connection before today, or for talking to you, to actually ask that question. Are you worried about the animal's safety? And that could, as you said, open up for a deepening of what's happening to that person too. And I actually thought it was the opposite way from what you were talking about. Maybe not in the animal sexual abuse, but I wondered if it would be an easier segue into, how does your partner treat the dog or the animal, might be an easier revelation, to say my partner is really hard on the animal, versus my partner is really hard on me, as sort of a rapport building segue. I thought that would be a more natural slide, but so it's just related to the animal sexual abuse. It's the harder thing to disclose then.
Yeah, it really is. It's that. So victims are more likely to talk about the animal than themselves. So it is a good segue. I think what the questions you just suggested in that relationship building is a good way in. It's just around the sexual abuse. If they have been coerced into sexual assault of animals, that this deep shame and highly unlikely to discuss or disclose is present. But otherwise, you're absolutely right. Your intuition's bang on for
to go, that way. And then, it was really interesting for us, is because, as we're all in our homes, mediating online now, right? We do all these things online, and we don't have the luxury of going into people's homes generally. That's not what, in my old work, I was always in people's homes, and I could see their kids and their dogs and pets, and I can see that the hat, when I was wearing it, would have a much more kind of hands-on approach. But now that we've switched to online, it's kind of neat, because we're actually in the people's homes now, and their dog will bark or something, and it's sort of a nice connection. It's like, oh, I'd love to see your dog. Tell me about your dog, or your cat, or your parrot that's landed on your head. And so it's there's an interesting opportunity for us as mediators mediating online to see more of the person's surroundings and their home, and assess their animals in a way where we didn't have that opportunity before. And Age has talked about asking to show pictures of dogs or kids as a way to make that connection too. But the live version is kind of cool to see that connection and see the stress. Maybe, I had a neat case the other day that the dog was not loved by the mom in this case, but was very much loved by the father. No signs of abuse, but it was just interesting to see that dynamic, like the piece between them. But yeah, any last questions from our gang here? It's coming right up to the, I can't believe it's gone so quickly. The slides will not be shared, but the presentation will be on our YouTube channel and then posted to our website under the About section under resources. All of our webinars are posted there, so people can have a look. I recently figured out YouTube, so that was very cool. So that's where it'll be, Barbara. And then if you want the links, you can email me directly, and as soon as Barbara has a chance to send me those, I'll send those to you. And thank you so much, Barbara. This has been a real eye-opener. You sensitively described all of these really difficult things, and I think, you know, I hope that you all felt as well supported as I did. So thanks very much, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. All right. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone. Thanks. Thanks, Barbara. Bye-bye. Bye.